Welcome back to part 2 of our Believe Santa project. We're going to work on the background now. We're going to use burnt umber and burnt sienna. The first step will be to add a light layer of the blending mix to the background. And I'm just going to do about half the board at a time so we don't dry out too fast. So just work that around the edges of the pattern. And then we'll start by picking up some of the burnt umber and brush that into the corner and just soften the edges out. Then pick up some burnt sienna and lay it down next and soften the edges together. And we're going to work around our board and just alternate between these two colors until we have the background all filled in. It looks a little rough right now, but we'll soften this out with a mop brush. Once you have the background in, take a mop brush and just softly tap the wet paint and it'll soften the brush lines out. You want to make sure your mop brush is completely dry when you do this. Go ahead and finish up the other half of the background, first applying the blending mix and then blocking it in with the burnt umber and burnt sienna. And the final step is to tap with a mop brush to soften the brush strokes. We're going to go back and work on the beard with a comb brush. This is sometimes called a comb or a rake, but it is a brush that has separated bristles to give you some fine lines with one stroke. To load it, you need to use wet paint, which you want to mix some water in with your paint. And when you load the brush, you want to push down on the handle so the ferrule is against your palette, and just twist that handle in between your fingers, and that will cause the bristles to splay out on your palette. So you're pushing out and it separates, and then when you lay down the strokes, you've got a lot of fine little hairlines. So we're going to go through the whole beard and just to apply some dark gray value hair strokes to add some texture to the beard. The dark gray will be our shading color, and as you pull, you want to add some little fine strokes off the edges of the hair and beard to add some softness and loose lines to the edges. Next, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use our light gray mix, or light gray value, and start stroking on light hair strokes to build up our highlights. These won't be our strongest highlights. We'll go back later with some pure white. But this is just starting to build up some light values. You want to kind of watch your original shading floats on the beard and where you've placed your dark values so that you can start working up some light locks of hair. You don't want just an even coat of light and dark paint over the whole beard. You want some lighter areas and some darker areas to add some interest. Again, you want to pull these strokes out over the edges of the base coat so that we have some soft lines and curls on the edges of the beard. Next, we're going to basin the hat with the yellow-green light. Use a 3/8 or 1/2 inch flatter angle brush to do this. I normally would base in the top section of the hat first, above the fold, and then base the bottom section. I find that little bit of a division line between the two where we're going to put our shadow helps me from having to add any tracing lines. Just gives you a little bit of a definition where the fold's going to be and your shading will fall. While the hat's drying, we're going to go back to our beard, and using white and our rake brush, we're going to start adding stronger highlights. These will be put on in the same manner that we added the dark gray value and the light gray value. You still want to pay attention and make it form locks of hair, not just an even distribution of the light and dark values. This is going to require multiple layers to build up your highlights. So just keep, as the paint dries, you can go back and just keep adding stronger areas of highlight. We're going to just keep building up these light values by adding additional layers. And you can start seeing how our locks of hair on the beard are starting to become a little bit more emphasized. Be sure to pull those ends out over the edges of your beard so that you get a soft hair-like texture on the background. Now we'll move on to the mustache, and we're going to do similar strokes on the mustache, first with our dark gray value. If it doesn't seem to come off your brush, add a little bit more water. And we're going to pull these from the top of the mustache and kind of swerve them out and into the bottom edge. Just want to fill in that mustache. After the dark gray value is applied, you can go back with your white and start overstroking the mustache with the white highlights. While the mustache is drying, let's do a wash of burnt umber over the hat band. Just apply a light, even coat, and once that's on and dried, we're going to apply a second wash. Let the headband dry and let's go back to the beard. My final stage on the beard on strokes is to use a 20-aught liner and white paint. I've added some water to it to make it kind of inky, and I'm going to go along and emphasize some of the lightest edges of the beard, just by pulling multiple strokes along the light edges. Any place I want to emphasize. You want to keep these kind of long and flowing. Just continue along and do this over the entire beard and the hair along the sides of the face. We want to emphasize the edges of the hair and beard by just pulling some long, wispy curls out along the edges onto the background. Use the liner brush to also highlight the mustache by pulling additional hair strokes over the entire mustache. As you're pulling the strokes, you want the top edge of the mustache to be the lightest. And coming down to the bottom edge, pull the strokes off the bottom edge of the mustache so that bottom edge is softened. With some dark gray value, pull some little strokes from under the hat brim to soften down into that hair. This will soften the start of those white strokes and give a little shading. You can add some little wisp of white hair on the forehead. Again, we're just softening the edges of the hair. I'm going to use the round sable brush and do some dry brushing with white. So load your brush, wipe out excess on a paper towel, and we're going to just dry brush over highlights on the mustache and on the beard. Again, this is just to pump up those highlights a little more. I want to add some last little detail here on the outer edges of the beard and just pull some additional white strokes to add more little wispy curls. I'm going to do some shading on the hat now, and I'm first applying a light coat of the blending mix. We're going to shade the hat with some of the phthalo green, yellow, plus a little bit of burnt umber. We're going to run this shading first across the top of this fold in the hat. Then we want to add some down here along the side of the hat against the beard and hat brim. I'm going to darken the sides of the top of the hat here on the left. And just walk that shading towards the center a little bit. You can continue shading here along the top left of the hat. And then just randomly pat in some shading here and there. I'm sort of giving this hat sort of a kind of velveteen look. So it's going to be just soft and not very detailed. Let's continue darkening the shadows here above the hat brim. Then add some shading here above the fold in the hat just to soften that crease down. And just continue adding some shadows over top of this fold just to soften this crease and just make it look a little bit more of a indented shadow. We're going to work on the furry hat band, and again we're going to use the comb or rake brush and some black paint, and we're going to start pulling little short fur strokes out from the edges of the hat band. And you want them pulling out and overlapping the edge to soften it. And then you're going to work them throughout the hat band in sort of a starburst effect. Here you can see we need to pull them out kind of in a circle so that the little fur strokes are going in all the different directions to fill in this hat band. After we do the black strokes, we want to go back and add some burnt sienna strokes just to add a little more color to the fur. Then we want to add some white into our burnt sienna to make this flesh color. Or you could just use one of your flesh mixes if you have some on your palette. And we're going to start pulling some lighter strokes to highlight the fur.